Hi, and welcome to our ongoing series of Facebook Live interviews. I'm Karen, and today Brick Coffee Company in Norwood has generously offered this space to us for this interview, so we thank them. We have the opportunity to meet and learn about Rodney Harris today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for being here. And he is a candidate in Municipal Court District 2. Joining us tonight are TWW Cincinnati, United We Stand, Indivisible for All, and we welcome you all. And thank you so much for being here and your ongoing interest in all of this education and meeting our candidates. We welcome all questions. So to ask a question, you need to click on the link for the feed, the original feed for this on TWW Southwest Ohio. That page, and then post your question there. If you post a question on the feed for TWW East Cincinnati, things like that, it may not get to us. So make sure you get to the original feed. And please invite any other friends or family or neighbors to also post questions. We look forward to everybody's live questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really fun to get those. We request no questions from other judicial candidates or their campaign staff, please. This is an education forum for those of us who may not be quite as knowledgeable about what we're going to be talking about this evening. You can look for future Q&A events for CPS School Board and other municipal judges. Mayor Cranley will be with us on September 14th and Yvette Simpson on September 26th. And then please like our page and follow us on Twitter at TWWSWOH, which is TWW Southwest Ohio. We also have a YouTube channel where you can find all of our Q&A recordings. And there will be a link for that in the comments as well. Okay?
Very good.
So I think we are ready to start. And just to get things started, I'd like to introduce Rodney Harris and give a little background before we start the interview, all right? So Rodney began his legal career as an associate with Lawson & Gaines, LLC, under the tutelage of the late Leslie Isaiah Gaines and Kenneth L. Lawson. In 1998, he opened his own law office, Rodney J. Harris, Attorney at Law. From 1998 to 2005, his area of practice was personal injury, Social Security, civil rights, juvenile, family law, and contracts, with a focus on criminal law. Rodney practiced law throughout the state of Ohio, having tried jury trials in multiple jurisdictions throughout the state. In 2005, Rodney formed Harris & Allen, LLC, then became a sole practitioner in 2008, with offices all over Cincinnati until 2014. And he earned the reputation as an experienced, effective, and aggressive trial attorney, handling cases ranging from aggravated murder, rape, drug offenses, aggravated robbery, to minor misdemeanor offenses. So a great breadth of legal experience.
Absolutely.
In 2014, Rodney became the director of the Hamilton County Public Defender's Office, the Felony Division, as the first African-American to hold office of director in the history of the Hamilton County Public Defender's Office. As director, he led trial counsel for the office and is death penalty certified, and other responsibility include things like staff supervision, liaison between the Common Pleas Court and criminal defense bar, hiring, department restructuring, investigating and resolving client complaints, and participating in community events on behalf of the Hamilton County Public Defender's Office. And Rodney has many distinctions. In 2016, he was awarded the Jim Looker Award from the Greater Cincinnati Criminal Defense Lawyers Association for excellence in the conscientious and effective representation of citizens accused of crimes. That's a mouthful.
It is.
Yeah,
It is.
excellent. This year, he was presented with Distinguished Service Award from the Black Lawyers Association of Cincinnati. He has served the community as precinct election official. He has also worked as a legal analyst for ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox networks. Rodney has been very active in the community, including pro bono work. He took the lead role with the Black Lawyers Association of Cincinnati, educating the community on law in various forums, and has presented at the University of Cincinnati Law School and other community groups such as Black Lives Matter. Rodney is very active in the community, also with children, working with Powell Crosley YMCA and the Princeton Education Foundation, and most recently has received a proclamation from both the Ohio Senate and the House of Representatives for his services to our community. So for Rodney's full bio, as if that wasn't enough, you can click on the link to his site posted in the comments.
Thank you.
Yes, all right. Well, welcome. That was a long setup for you.
Very happy to be here.
Great, great. So as a reminder, Rodney Harris is a candidate in the Municipal Court District 2. And we'll put a link to the district map in the comments also, so you can check what district you're in if you aren't sure. So to start us off, what should voters know? What would you like voters to know about what municipal judges do? What do they do?
Well, the municipal court is a court that handles misdemeanor cases and civil cases with up to $15,000. The cases that are less than $3,000 are normally shipped out to small claims court. But the reason that municipal court is so important is because it's the people's court. Most people in our community come into contact with court either through traffic offenses or less serious criminal offenses. So it's the first impression that many citizens have of our justice system and whether it's fair, whether it's impartial. So it's a very important job.
Okay, all right. And why is it important then not only that they vote for municipal judges like you, but that they vote for to be well informed about this vote?
Well, you know, as I was doing a lot of things in the community with Black Lawyers Association the past few years, one of the things we've really been pushing is to try to get all of our citizens to exercise their civil rights. Whether it's registering to vote, whether it's actually voting, whether it's serving on juries. And then if you take another look at it, you're talking about someone who, by law, has the ability to incarcerate you. So you absolutely want to know who's standing in judgment. Has the person been involved in the community? Is the person aware of the issues that are confronting the community? And that's why it's so important that we get informed about who these candidates are, because as you watch a lot of the trials, the judges have a lot of impact on how the trial is resolved. So it's very important.
Okay. And you've probably started to answer this question, but what qualities do you think voters should consider when voting for municipal judges?
Well, you know, the first thing that you always want to look is the overall temperament of a judge. So first and foremost, what I think is important is a person of high integrity, a person with compassion and empathy, experience, knowledge, I think is important, patience, open-mindedness. And I think something that people often overlook is kind of a street sense or street smart, because a lot of times a judge is the one who's the deciding factor, the fact finder. So if a person is naive and doesn't really understand kind of how things work and so forth, you can kind of get the wool pulled over your eyes. So I think those are all characteristics that are really important when we're choosing not only our municipal court judges, but our common pleas judges also.
Okay. What should progressive voters look for in particular in a municipal judge?
Well, you know, when you say progressive, what I think about is people that are looking for social and economic equality. Mm-hmm. And what I would suggest is you take a close look at the background and see if that person's background makes you believe that they'll champion your ideas and your beliefs. So just in this instance, in District 2, we have a candidate that has been a prosecutor, has run for prosecutor, has spent a decade as a magistrate. And the question becomes, does that make you believe that there's going to be change? We have another candidate that's, again, I believe a magistrate for over a decade. Then you look at a candidate such as myself. I've been in criminal practice for 20 years. I've been involved in the community. I'm currently a public servant, a public defender. And that makes me believe that I look at a lot of the issues a little bit differently than the status quo typically does. So I think it's important that voters in general, but progressive voters specifically, look at the background and again look and see if that person would champion their ideas and beliefs. And I believe I'm the person that could do that.
All right, all right. I'd also like to apologize to our viewers. We've had some noise, some apparent construction or something like that going on. So we hope that you can hear well and that you're patient with our answers.
Yes, it is.
All right, all right. So what issues do you feel are most important for Hamilton County municipal judges right now?
Right now, what I think is most important is finding alternatives for punishment other than just incarcerating. Oftentimes what we hear is that our jails are overcrowded. We constantly have issues with our jails, so our judges need to be more creative in how they impose sentence. I think the other thing that we really need to look at is how the bonds are being set. And a lot of times the bonds can help complicate the issue of jail overcrowding. Standing from a defense attorney's point of view, oftentimes you'll have someone who has, in my opinion, an unreasonable bond. They've sat there for 45 days, so they've lost their livelihood, they lost their home, they lost their job. Many times their family's in disarray because of it. The case gets dismissed, and they're trying to put their life back together, when if you had a reasonable bond to start with, a lot of those issues could have been avoided. So I think that's something that we need to take a close look at. I know it's something that you have to do on a case-by-case basis, but just being on the front lines, in court every day, in arraignment court most of the week, you see and hear a lot of things that, again, I think we can do better that way.
And do judges influence those types of things, like how bonds are set, or are those decisions made by others in the community, in the judicial system?
Well, judges actually in arraignment court set the bonds.
Okay.
It's a number of factors that they look at. First and foremost is the nature of the crime and whether a weapon was involved and whether there was violence. They also look at the weight of the evidence that's potentially against that defendant. They look at what's needed to get that person to come back to court. So again, you got to factor in all those things. Then finally, you look at the prior record and whether they were on any kind of community control or court control or anything like that, and look and try to set a bond with the idea of making sure that that person returns to court. A secondary concern is whether the community would be safe and so forth with that person out. But that's something I think we need to take a close look at.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. What geographic area would you cover if you're elected?
If elected, you would be a Hamilton County Municipal Court judge, so the entire county. And Hamilton County cases are assigned by lot, and what that means is you have the potential to get any of the 14 municipal court judges when you enter that courthouse. If you're cited for a speeding ticket or something, you enter a not guilty plea once you see a magistrate, that case will be assigned by lot, so it's a chance that you can receive any of the 14 judges. So although it's divided down to a district, it's really a judge for Hamilton County. So that's why it's important for the entire county, whether you live in a district or not.
Okay. And so where would your courthouse be specifically? Will you have one?
Well, the county seat for Hamilton County is downtown Cincinnati. So the courthouse is 1000 Main Street. I believe the courtroom where the judge is currently presiding, Judge Grant, is in room 220. Okay. So I look forward to hanging my shingle in 220 if the voters so choose me. Okay.
All right. How do municipal court proceedings differ from higher court proceedings?
Well, it's a lot faster paced. The dockets are usually a little bit larger. Normally with municipal court dockets, they're usually dealing with about 2,500 cases per year. Okay, so if you break that down, if you're looking at, say, 250 days of working, it gives you an idea of at least 10 cases per day. It often depends on how the judges decide to structure their docket. Some judges don't want cases heard on Friday, or they may do their civil docket on Friday. Some judges don't want cases heard on Monday. So it'll have a lot of effect on how heavy those caseloads are. The small things that you're looking at from municipal court to common pleas court, juries of 12 in common pleas court versus juries of 8 in municipal court. In municipal court, you typically go from arraignment to pretrial. If you have motions filed, motion hearings, and then trial. In common pleas court, there's usually arraignment, then disposition scheduling conference, then plea or trial settings, motion hearings, and so forth. So the biggest thing is there's a lot more trials, there's a lot more, I would say, action. When I bring community members down to the courthouse to give them tours, when I bring students down to the courthouse to give them tours, there's normally more going on in municipal court because you have, like I said earlier, the people's court, traffic tickets, small property offenses, landlord-tenant, small claims, the things that most of our citizens have contact with.
Okay, all right. So you talked a little bit about that caseload. How does caseload affect how judges like you would approach individual cases?
Well, I think that the caseload a lot of times, it pushes towards trying to resolve the case by way of a plea bargain. oftentimes, just because many times there's so many cases that it would be hard to have trials all day. But a trial is absolutely necessary. It's a constitutional right. So what you want to have is judges that are trial attorneys. I can sit here very proudly and say I'm a high-level trial attorney. I've tried more than 150 jury trials at the highest level. So I'm very experienced in that regard. And that's one of the #1 things that we should look at. We don't necessarily want commercial attorneys, tax attorneys, that kind of thing. You want a trial attorney. A criminal defense attorney is a trial attorney. So again, those are things that I think would help alleviate some of the pressures, because a lot of times you don't want to have judges who are trying to avoid having a trial. A trial attorney looks forward to that, looks forward to a day in court. So those are some of the things that I think policy-wise I could bring, just because, again, I'm used to having trials. I'm doing that just about daily.
All right. Are there any kinds of problems with our municipal courts that you feel need to be addressed, and how would you address them?
I would go back to what I said earlier. First and foremost, making sure that the bonds are doing what the bonds are achieved to do. And one of the things that I think that we need to look at, and I know our governor's office has been looking at, is the Maryland method right now. And what they're doing is pushing towards kind of a cashless bond type system, with the idea is you don't want an affluent person to get out when a poor person or indigent person wouldn't. So just having money to pay it shouldn't be enough. So what they're doing now is kind of looking at it from a fact-based approach. First and foremost, is it necessary to have that person return to court by using a money bond? Okay? If the evidence doesn't show that it's necessary, what you want to do is use the least onerous way of letting that person out, with the idea of social equality, so that the rich person isn't getting an advantage that the poor person wouldn't. I think that's something that we need to look at, closely. And again, what we have to do in our systems is make sure that we're managing our jail, okay? Because it's a big expense to lock someone up. So we want to make sure that we're making the right decision when we're setting a bond that a person can't make. Now, again, if you're talking about violent offenses, weapon offenses, that's something that we need a jail for. But if we're talking about non-violent offenses, I think we have to find alternatives to just locking them up.
Okay, all right. Well, I'd like to kind of step back a little and learn a little bit about you. Okay. And starting out with, why did you decide to become a lawyer? Well,
I was a college athlete. I was a college football player. And when I figured out that I wasn't good enough to go to the NFL, I decided I wanted to be a sports agent. Well, after I got into law school, I was still interested in being a sports agent, and I met Ken Lawson. Ken Lawson was a dynamic attorney, to say the least. He had a focus on community service. And I really enjoyed the idea of it's you and your client against the state. And you're kind of standing in the way, you're standing there to protect them, and you're asserting their rights, and you're fighting for justice and so forth. And it was something that I really, grew a passion for. And that's why I ended up, going to law school, but that's how I ended up in criminal law, just because, Ken explained it to me. He says, when you're a sports agent, you need the client. When you're a criminal defense attorney, they need you. And, it's a different level of responsibility when you're talking about someone's life and liberty. It's something that, really gets you going. And I'm a guy who likes to be the underdog and, fight against our government and so forth. So it's been something that has truly been my calling, to help people, to help citizens find equal and exact justice in our law.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask about why you want to become a judge in a moment, but there was a follow-up question from someone, one of our live listeners, and they asked, you talked about setting a bond with an eye towards social equality. Can you say more about what latitude the judge has in this regard, and are there any systemic changes required to make bonds more equitable? I think you talked about the Maryland method. Are there any other?
Well, the biggest thing is what the judge is supposed to be looking at, first of all, is the nature of the offense. And the second thing that they want to look at is, again, what's going to be required to get that person back to court. So when they're factoring that in, they're looking at the weight of the evidence. They're looking at whether this is actually, and what the evidence points to, if this is actually the person that committed the crime. And then they want to look at their actual criminal history, whether they were on probation, whether they had a prior record, what's their mental health status, their prior record, was it violent offenses, and those kind of things. So some of the stuff is, I think, kind of subjective when you're looking at whether the weight of the evidence is there, whether it's confirming that they're there, because you're still early in the process. So you haven't seen the whole case and know all the evidence. But those are all things that I think a judge, and depending on your perception and your point of view, may look at differently. You know, there's a wide range from judges, of the 14 judges now, on how they set bonds. Some things are more important to some judges than others. And one thing I will point out is just, again, I think you have to go back to the history and the background of that person. I'm a criminal defense attorney. You know, I've practiced in all areas of law, but with a focus on criminal. I've been in private practice and also, you know, a public servant. So, you know, I think I see things a little bit different than, you know, the status quo. So I think all that will have an effect on, you know, how I would set bonds and that kind of thing.
Okay. So a fair amount of latitude the judge has.
A fair amount of latitude.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so back to, you talked about why you wanted to become a lawyer, which is really interesting, but what appeals to you about being a judge?
Well, as a criminal defense attorney, you really can do a lot to help your community and serve your client. There's no question about that. But what you need to do is you need to get the judge and the prosecutor on the same page. So you can definitely do a service to the community, but if you're truly interested in serving the community in a higher capacity as a judge, if you see something and you follow the law, you can affect it without the agreement of the prosecutor and the defense attorney. You can make decisions just following the law and in your heart and that kind of thing without. And having been on the front lines in court, in the Hamilton County Courthouse, with few exceptions, every day over the last 20 years, I've watched many attorneys ascend to the bench with little more than 6 years of experience in a party endorsement. And since they haven't really been in the system, they don't respect the system, they don't respect the protocol, they don't respect the parties, and it just makes for disaster. After watching that for so many years, I said someone's got to break that chain. Someone's got to step out and be willing to be an independent candidate. And it's not always been easy, but I'm very proud to say, as I sit here, that I'm an independent candidate. I haven't asked either party for any kind of endorsement. And that's really been my motivation as to why I want to be a judge, because I think that I can be different. I'm strong enough to stand up for what's right. I'm strong enough to push back on the state when necessary. And I think that that's something that we need more of.
Can you talk a little bit more about the benefit of someone outside of those parties? Like, what's the advantage?
Well, oftentimes, and I can tell you from doing the community, touring the community, doing the various forums, whether it's for Black Lawyers Association or Black Lives Matter or University of Cincinnati or other groups, people are looking for a change. People have a problem trusting our system. People believe that a lot of times the decision has already been decided because of the politics in the courtroom before they even get their day in court. So I don't see how it would hurt to come in and say, I'm impartial, I haven't aligned myself with either side. I'm coming in right in the middle of it, and I believe that I can be fair. And I would take it a step further and say that not only do we need to kind of get away from the political parties, but I think we need diversity in background. The path to becoming a judge shouldn't just be a prosecutor or a magistrate. Experienced defense attorneys have seen a whole lot. We break bad news to clients every day. We can look at things and evaluate what's fair and what's just, because oftentimes that's what we're doing in the plea negotiations and plea bargains. So those are all things that I think are important that we need to look at, because again, you can't continue to blindly play partisanship and choose our elected officials through parties, you know, their party affiliation, and then expect change. You can't continue to do the same thing and expect change. You got to take a chance and, you know, find someone that's qualified, no doubt qualified, but also with independent values, progressive values, and those kind of things.
All right. You may have already articulated this, but can you sum up what your specific judicial philosophies are?
Well, judges, just like any other citizens, absolutely need to follow the law. There's no question about that. People, then when they come to court, should be treated with dignity and respect, and that's not always happening down there. You can pass sentence, you can send a person to prison without denigrating them. Judges need to make sure that they're avoiding the appearance of impropriety. I talked a lot about that party affiliation and those kind of things. But again, that leaves an impression to a lot of people in our community because of those affiliations that the judge isn't always impartial, that they may be influenced. So those are all things that I would be absolutely on guard to make sure that people have the confidence in our judiciary that someone's going to, when you come to the courthouse, you're going to be treated with respect, whether you were right or wrong or whatever. When you come to the courthouse, that you'll have a fair and impartial and objective judge, someone who's not already aligned themselves up with either side. Those are things that I think are important, qualities that I think are absolutely important in our judges.
All right. I just want to make sure, because kind of listening, you've been have you been both a defending and prosecuting attorney?
I have never been a prosecutor. I have never had an interest in being a prosecutor, and I think I can knock on wood and say it's very unlikely that I will ever be a prosecutor. I really like kind of being the underdog and fighting for citizens that way on the other side of the aisle. And again, I think there's a place for a very, good, aggressive, effective defense attorney. Okay.
A civil and criminal lawyer?
Civil and criminal. I've handled personal injury. I've handled some civil rights cases. I've handled Social Security. I've done family law. I've done contracts. I've done some landlord-tenant. Again, I was a general practitioner. But for the most part, my day was made up of criminal cases. From, early in my career, I was handling felonious assaults and murder cases and aggravated murders and, sentences that, if you lose, your client could very well get life. So, cases with a lot of pressure, a lot of intensity, cases where you have to be very well rehearsed in the rules of evidence and know the criminal rules of procedure and so forth.
Okay. And what is a magistrate judge?
A magistrate judge is a judge in Hamilton County. It's a judge that's been hired by the presiding party. So if the Republicans are running the courthouse and a magistrate was hired, the Republicans hired that magistrate. If the Democrats were running the courthouse, the Democrats hired the magistrates. The magistrates handle a small claims court. The magistrates do other assignments they may fill in for judges when the judge is out or something. But it's, in my mind, it's, I guess, a minor league player. It's kind of like the backup quarterback, and oftentimes that backup quarterback never becomes a starter. Sometimes they'll bring in a young star, to come and lead the team. But that's what a magistrate is. It's kind of, I guess, an assistant to a judge. Okay.
All right. So I'd like to get into some of the specific issues and get your point of view on those.
Very good.
And so what approach will you take with drug offenders, including those who commit crimes motivated by addiction?
Well, first and foremost, I don't believe every conviction calls for prison time or jail time, since we're talking municipal court jail time. When you're talking about drug offenders, and I supervise a drug court now, I think the number one thing that we have to do is we have to keep in mind treatment alternatives, and so forth. So with drug offenders and nonviolent offenders, if it's just an addiction, a possession type scenario, that would be something that I would expect, and you have to look at every case on a case-by-case basis, there's no doubt. You have to look at the criminal history and so forth. But I would expect you would look at alternatives to incarceration where you're talking about a low-level drug offender and possession and that kind of thing. I would think even with a violation, because part of the recovery, part of the transition from being drug addicted to getting off, a lot of times is relapses. And if you're dealing with drug court the way I deal with drug court and so forth, that's a part of recovery. So just because someone was to relapse, if it hasn't included new crimes, if it hasn't became violent or something like that, that's something that maybe you want to give them another part, understanding that's a part of the recovery process. But when that possession, when that usage starts to put the rest of the community in jeopardy, when it begins to elevate to thefts, and if you see potential for auto accidents and that kind of thing, that may be something that you have to tailor another sentence towards. But the biggest thing is you have to look at each case individually. You have to judge it on a case-by-case basis. But I can say that nonviolent offenses, I believe we have to do a better job of finding alternatives than just our justice center and our jail.
Yeah. Do you feel that prisons are adequately dealing with the problem of addiction?
I think we can do better, is what I would say to that. It's too many times that I've seen, and again, our prisons have some programs that can address, and I can't pretend to say that I know every program that's offered, and I can't pretend to say whether I know that the inmates have a choice in taking them, but there's too many times that I've represented clients, they've had an issue, the judge wasn't sensitive to their issues, and they were sent to prison, and they came back and they had that same addiction. that they were battling and so forth. So again, I think we can do better. Again, I can't pretend to sit here and tell you that I know every program that's being offered and what the success rates are, but I think there's always room for improvement.
Okay, all right. So code violations, the exciting world of code violations. Right. Do municipal judges hear cases having to do with code violations? They
do.
Okay.
They do. In Hamilton County, we have a judge that's assigned the housing docket, and he reviews a lot of the code violations and so forth. And just as I said earlier, a code violation, it shouldn't get to a point where someone who's affluent, who's making a lot of money, can avoid jail time when a poor person couldn't. And a lot of times with our code violations, that's exactly kind of what's happening. A lot of the times people are in the issues and the situations that they are because they just don't have the means. And that's something that I'm very sensitive to. I'm a public defender. Before we represent someone, they have to qualify for our services. So again, when you're talking about nonviolent offenses, we're talking about, crimes, and not necessarily crimes, but I think that there's something we need to look at whether we can treat it as a civil action versus a criminal action. Because again, if the violation is a code violation and we lock a person up in our jail, is that code violation really getting addressed? What's the likelihood of a person being locked up, getting out, and then having the means to improve or fix that violation? Instead of getting closer to improving it, you're getting farther away because, again, now you're looking at whether your family is going to be put out on the street because you can't pay rent or whatever the case is because of, maybe the head of the house is incarcerated. The code violation is still not getting improved when that person's taken away, so the neighborhood is still suffering. So I think we have to find, again, alternatives to it. A lot of times I see EMU, the electronic monitoring is one of the fixes, but again, if the idea is to make sure that the person is available to work and seek other work so that they can make the revenue to pay off that code violation, you got to wonder if some of the things are counterproductive.
Are there any times when homeowners should be arrested and serve jail time for code violations?
And again, you have to see it on a case-by-case basis, but it's hard to imagine just sitting here and hearing some of the things now. Again, I think the history of it would come into play. But I would certainly think, and I haven't seen it, but it would have to be rare instances that you were talking about actually incarcerating a person for a code violation. Again, those jail beds are very valuable. I would much rather spend a jail bed where I feel safer at night because that person is off the street than someone whose retaining wall couldn't hold back the dirt. I feel like that's a waste of a jail bed, and that's something that we need to definitely be sensitive to and pay a lot of attention to when we're using those jail beds.
Okay. How can we ensure that people do take care of their property and neighborhoods, but not under the threat of arrest? Are there some other solutions that you specifically have in mind? Well,
one of the things I talked about was treating it more like a civil action. And there can also, be penalties there. I think what we also have to do is kind of do our best to try to strengthen and get financial support to some of the not-for-profit support systems that are in place that help homeowners who have the code violations try to get back up to specs and get back up to code.
What are some of those?
I believe a home ownership company is one of them.
Okay.
I know they've been active in Cincinnati, in Hamilton County with some of the homeowners that have some code violations. There are other groups that I can't think of the name of, but I think that we need to do our best to make sure that they're funded so that people that are needy can get their homes back in condition so that they're safe. Because a lot of times these people have families, they have young kids, and they want their house to be, within code. They want it to be a safe place, but they may be in a place where they just can't afford it. So I think that's where compassion and empathy kind of comes in, having patience. And again, some of these things need to get done, absolutely, because our property values may suffer if they're not. But I think there's, whether it's a civil action instead of a criminal action, there's other ways to address it.
Okay, all right. So I'd like to address the disparities in the judicial system. So there are racial disparities at every level of the justice system today. What can you do and will you do to curtail that?
Well, one of the things that I can say is being in the courthouse, I think when citizens come into the courthouse, they should be able to see themselves in the courthouse. People that look like them in positions of of not necessarily power, but working within the courthouse. So judges, lawyers, courtroom staff, and so forth. One of the things that I'm most proud of as director of the Hampton County Public Defender's Office Felony Division is when I first came into our division, out of a staff of 27, we had 2 African American attorneys in the entire staff. As we sit here now, we have 6 African American attorneys. Of our support staff, 4 of the paralegals, 2 are minorities. Of our investigative staff, of the 2 full-time investigators we have, 1 is minority. So we went where we were 2%, a little bit less than 10, to now where a third of our division is reflective of our community. I think that's very important. It's that kind of vision and that kind of foresight I think we have to have through our judges and so forth. And I'm not talking about quotas or anything like that, but what I'm talking about is giving people an opportunity, making sure that we're reaching out and we're casting our net wide enough that we're giving everyone an opportunity that we can select the best people. Because I think when people come to the courthouse, they should see themselves. They shouldn't come to the courthouse and feel like I'm the only one of my kind, I'm the only one that looks like me inside this building. So I can tell you that that's something that's dear to me, that's something that's important to me. It's something that I would definitely be aware of. And I want good, qualified people, but I think we have to make sure that we're giving everyone an opportunity.
Okay, all right. So you've talked a fair amount about plea bargains. That's been something you've talked about. What is the current role of plea bargains in municipal court?
Well, plea bargains happen quite often, and I think they're absolutely a necessary evil. But what we have to make sure that we do, and the reason they are is because oftentimes you have people who've made a poor decision, made a bad choice, they may be guilty of the offense, and what they're trying to do is save themselves time. They know they made a mistake, whether it's speeding. I know I made a mistake, I'm not going to sit here and have a trial over it, I can't miss another day of work. So plea bargain is absolutely a necessary evil. What we need to avoid is making sure that we're not having plea bargains simply because a person couldn't afford their bond. They're sitting there just so that they can get out. Those are the kind of plea bargains we want to do our best to try to avoid. So what we have to do is make sure that we're organized with our dockets, making sure that we're moving our cases along so that a person isn't interested in plea bargaining just so that they can get the case resolved and get out of there. And a lot of times that's what's happening. A person doesn't want to wait around to have a trial. A trial takes a little bit more time to set. You know, you can enter a plea bargain at that first pretrial hearing. Okay? And a lot of times a cure to be thrown that if you enter a plea to this, you'll get out today. Okay? Well, what we have to make sure that we're doing is setting the bonds, and that's why that's so important, that a person doesn't feel like the only way I get out of jail is by entering this plea. Okay? We want to make sure we set the bonds fairly, so if a person is truly not guilty, they're not persuaded to enter a plea bargain just to get it resolved, that now they have the patience to be able to sit it out and have a trial and contest it. Because, and again, this is something as a criminal defense attorney and a public defender I'm very sensitive to. Things tend to escalate when you get a conviction on your record. Remember what I talked about with bonds. That's one of the things, although it's low on the list, that a judge will look at when they're trying to set a bond, whether you had prior convictions. You know, if you entered a conviction or entered a guilty plea just to get the case over with, you come back again a year from now, that may cause you difficulty. That may be one more factor that a judge considers when he puts a cash bond or a higher bond on you. So again, I think plea bargains are a necessary evil, but what we don't want is for people just to enter a plea bargain just so that they can get back home. I'm not guilty, but I have no choice but to take this plea bargain because I can't afford to sit in jail for 45 more days. Got
it. So they're completely interrelated, bonds and plea bargains.
I believe so, absolutely. Because again, you know, people are a lot of times trying, their sole goal is to get back out and get back to their lives, get back to their families.
Okay, all right. Are there any questions I haven't asked you yet? Things that you feel are really important, but that maybe I'm not educated about this. What are other important municipal court issues that we should all be aware of?
Well, I think one of the most important, and not just for municipal court, but I think all of our elected officials, we should demand that our elected officials be involved and have an interest in our community before ever becoming a candidate. And I think that that's something that, again, when you look down the road of what I can expect from that judge. If they have a body of work, if they have involvement in the community, if they're aware of the community issues and have been dealing with people in the community, you have a much better idea or a better way to forecast how they'll be when confronted with different issues. I think we do ourselves as a community an injustice when we don't require that elected officials actually be involved and have an interest and make an investment in our community. I think that's so very important nowadays because, again, it gives you an idea of who that person is, who they were before they came out and gave that speech, before they gave that stump speech.
Yeah.
You know, their history, their body of work prior to that. I think that's so very important nowadays.
Are there places that we as citizens can go to find that out besides the stump speech
Well,
we're talking about? Where can we find that kind of record and the points of view of these candidates, other existing municipal judges, without just simply relying on what they say, what their website might say? Are there other places we should be looking?
Well, I would say get involved in your community. And when you get involved in your community, you'll begin to see if they're out.
How?
Well, community council meetings, community events in your community. I was for a long time, and one of the things that you didn't mention on my bio that I'm so very proud of is I founded, presided over, and coached Little League football at Vikings Youth Athletics, a youth football and cheerleading program in the Princeton community. We were actually the first youth football and cheerleading program ever endorsed by the Princeton City School Board of Education. So again, just being out there, being involved, being a role model for the kids. So very proud to have done Aiken's commencement speech because again, out in the community and to be trusted with giving high school students their parting message before they take that next step in their life. They must really trust you. So again, just going out to the community, whether it's at a commencement, whether it's going down to your courthouse and seeing who's giving the tours to our community students and who's actually investing in these young men and young women. Those are things that are all important and things that I think that we need to look at. The other thing that I would say is look at how the candidates have achieved excellence in their field. When you went over my bio, what you talked about was my Black Lawyers Association honor, my Greater Cincinnati Criminal Defense Association honor. Those things aren't the most important things, but I do think it gives you a clue as to how your peers look at you. In the District 2 race, all three of the candidates are members of Black Lawyers Association. Only one of the candidates have been distinguished for their service into the community. I think that says a lot, and I think that's important. So I think that we need to look at the history and the background of the candidates and kind of compare and contrast. Maybe they weren't a criminal defense attorney, but how have they achieved excellence in their field? What have they done? What are their skins on the wall? I guess a hunter would say, or my granddad would say. You know, just kind of looking at their history and background and looking at how they've distinguished themselves from the pack.
And is most of that available online, like on their websites?
On the websites of the different community groups. I know that on Greater Cincinnati, or on Black Lawyers Association site it was listed, on Greater Cincinnati Criminal Defense Attorneys it was listed. And you know, just keep your eyes open and be in tune with your community. And I think once you do that, you'll hear the names of the people who have been out there, and you'll also hear the names of the people who just popped up.
Yeah. I know that a lot of our viewers are out there trying to get educated and trying to understand where to go for the information.
Absolutely.
To make these kinds of decisions. Well,
with all the interviews and so forth that TWW is doing, Together We Will, I'm sure this is very informative for many in the community. And, again, just kind of keep your ear to the ground, keep your ear to the street, and I'm sure you'll hear and learn a lot about the candidates.
All right. Excellent. Well, I think those are all the questions that we have for this evening. I would like to mention again for all of our viewers, if you have a question in the next minute or two, you can pop it in, but that this will be posted on our YouTube channel as well as several other locations online. And you can feel free to, the locations will be posted in the comments of this interview. And so we will get that in there, and you can look at this later, and that's the great thing about this. Not everyone can tune in at exactly the time we're on, but they often tune in later.
Absolutely.
So that's excellent. All right, so thank you all so much for watching, and look again for the mayoral interviews. We have Cranley on September 14th, and Yvette Simpson on September 26th. Thank you all so much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you. And thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.